The wind in the northern mountains did not whisper, it screamed, it howled through broken windows and tore through empty halls. The ruined fortress where Alden was sent stood like the skeleton of a forgotten god, bones of stone and shadow. It had no roof in some parts and in others. The snow fell directly into the corridors, piling like soft white graves. Alden arrived with no escort, only silence and memory. He brought nothing but a satchel of books, a wool cloak, and the ghost that never left his side. The first night was not kind. The firewood was damp, the walls moaned with age, and the stars above blinked with the eyes of 1,000 lost souls. Alden sat near the hearth, if it could be called that, and listened to the wind as if it carried old secrets across the mountain range. Lyra stood behind him, quiet as always, her gaze fixed on the far horizon. "This place is not dead," she said, "it remembers." And so began his exile, which for others would have been the end, but for Alden it was the beginning. He spent his days rebuilding not the stone, but himself, he read. He wrote, he carved his thoughts into the walls with broken pieces of glass, each phrase a confession, each line a truth unspoken in the royal halls. He mapped the stars every night, sketching them onto parchment faded with breath. He followed the rhythms of the wind and learned to read the earth, the birds, the frost, as if nature itself became his teacher. Sometimes he cried not from sorrow but from beauty, from the silence that listened back from the stories. The snow told when it fell slowly and alone. Lyra changed too, not in shape but in presence. She began to age. Slowly, subtly, her face became less translucent, her eyes deeper, her laughter warmer. She would sit with him near the fire, and they would speak not as ghost and boy, but as two souls exiled from time. "You are becoming more than royal," she said, "once you are becoming real." Years passed like dreams, some sweet, some dark. Alden did not count them, for time was no longer his master. The boy became a man, not in the way of swords and scars, but in wisdom and vision. His hair grew long, his hands strong, not from war, but from creation. He built a library out of ruins, filled it with scrolls. He wrote with ink made from berries and stone. He learned to heal wounds with herbs and words he taught himself, the forgotten languages of stars and dreams. And still he was forgotten. But the kingdom was not still, it rotted under. Kale, who now ruled with fear and flame taxes, rose fields. Burned voices silenced the people, whispered not of rebellion, but of despair, for hope was a word erased from their tongues. The court grew fat and blind, the king. A shadow of wrath the land cried beneath its crown. Then one winter the whispers changed, they spoke of a healer in the mountains, of a man who did not kill, but cured, who spoke to birds and read the sky, and whose eyes held both sadness and truth. Travelers began to seek the ruined fortress and found not a tomb, but a place of peace they found. Alden not in gold, but in gray, not in armor, but in warmth. He taught them, healed them, fed them stories and fire. He never said who he was, but word returned to the capital, not as a storm, but as a seed. And in time that seed grew into fear for Kale. For even the cruelest king fears a story he cannot control. Kale sent soldiers first cloaked as messengers. They offered gold land pardon, but Alden refused. With silence, he offered them food and sent them back with scrolls, not threats. Then Kale sent blades sharp and hungry, but the people stood before them, villagers. Peasants, wanderers who had once been lost, now found they did not fight. They stood, and the soldiers saw in their eyes something even steel could not pierce, hope. And so the army never arrived. Kale raged. He burned fields, cursed the stars, and broke mirrors, but could not break a name that had risen without being spoken. In the final year of his rule, the people rose not with weapons, but with words, songs, scrolls, and stories, all written in the style Alden had taught, not of power, but of presence. Kyle was overthrown, not by sword, but by silence and surrender. They came for Alden, not to crown him, but to thank him. To ask not for a king, but for a guide, a teacher, a builder of minds. He returned not in robes of royalty, but in the cloak he had worn in exile, patched with time and memory. He stepped into the same halls where he had once walked as a boy, and did not bow, for there was no throne, only a place to begin again. Alden reopened the schools, rebuilt the libraries, healed the sick, and wrote not for fame, but for the forgotten Lyra. Stood beside him, though now she cast a shadow and breathed the air she had become, more than memory, more than ghost. She was real in the way that only love can make real. She did not age past him nor before him, but with him. They walked together not as prince and ghost, but as story and soul years passed, and Alden grew old, not in weakness, but in depth, his hands lined with time, his eyes vast with stars. He died not in a bed of silk, but beneath an open sky, surrounded by those he had taught, healed, touched with words and warmth. Lyra wept, not because he was gone, but because he had become. They buried him not in the royal tombs, but in the garden of the fortress, the place he had once turned from, ruin into meaning. No statue, no crown, no monument, just a tree planted by his students growing, slow and wide like a memory that never fades. The castle still stands, though time has worn. Its edges, the scrolls still remain unsigned but cherished, and the stars still whisper his name, not as prince, not as king, but as the light that once lived in shadow. In an ancient land where kingdoms were born from blood and ambition, there existed a forgotten place carved between the mountains and clouds. It was a realm so veiled in silence that even maps dared not speak. Its name here in the echo of broken time. A prince was born to no celebration, only storm, thunder, and sorrow. The queen lay dying, her breath shallow, her eyes distant as she brought forth the child. The room was heavy with candle smoke and whispered prayers, but none reached the heavens. And when the infant cried, the storm cried louder. His name was Alden, named after a star that never rose, a prince of sorrow from the first breath. He took his mother gone, his father distant, and his people silent. King Roderick, once a mighty warrior, now stood still before the cradle. He did not smile. He did not touch the child. He simply turned and left robes dragging behind like the tail of a fading comet. Alden grew not in marble halls, but in the old forgotten tower, the one where ivy crawled through broken stone and wind whispered stories that no bard dared sing. He had no playmates, no tutors, only old books, brittle scrolls, and a nurse who never spoke his name aloud. The years passed like the wind, unseen, yet always there. Alden read, he learned of kings and wars, of stars and gods. But his favorite stories were not those of victory, but of those who were lost, forgotten, erased from glory and memory. On his 12th winter, as the snow fell like feathers from the sky, he saw her, a girl in white, standing by the moonlit window. She did not blink. She did not breathe yet. Her eyes held galaxies. "I am Lyra," she whispered, though her lips never moved. "I have been waiting a long time." Alden was not afraid. He had read of ghosts, of spirits, of things that linger when stories are not finished, and Lyra was unfinished, a chapter torn out of a book never published. She visited him each night, always under moonlight, never under sun, and she told him things, secrets about the castle, the people, and the kingdom, things no book ever dared to hold. The court whispered that Alden was cursed like his mother, touched by madness, speaking to things unseen and unheard. The king never questioned, only watched from a distance, his eyes dark with a fear he never named. Alden began to understand that this kingdom, this throne, this family was not what it seemed. The royal blood was stained with sorrow, with betrayal and silence, and he was merely a piece in a game, already lost. His elder brother, Prince Kael, was everything. Alden was not loud, strong, cruel, proud. He led armies, hunted beasts, and drank with nobles, yet his eyes were hollow, his smile sharp as a blade. Kael hated Alden not for his silence, but for the quiet strength he carried, for the way people listened when he spoke. Not out of fear, but out of something deeper. At night, Lyra would speak of Kael, too, she told. Alden, he would betray him one day, that his blood was fire and ambition, and he feared what Alden could become, not as a warrior, but as a voice, a symbol, a light. Years passed. Alden grew not in strength, but in soul. His heart was gentle, yet unbreakable. He healed wounded birds, wrote poetry to the stars, and once spent 3 days feeding a dying tree because Lyra said it had once been her favorite. Kael watched with growing rage as the people began to whisper, not of the warrior, but of the watcher of the prince, who read the stars and walked without guards. One night under a blood moon, Kael accused Alden before the court. He claimed Alden consorted with demons, that the ghost girl was a spirit of evil, and that their brother was plotting to steal the throne through sorcery. The king, old and broken, listened in silence, and then, with a voice as dry as dust, declared that Alden would be banished, not killed, for he was still of royal blood but cast out to the north, to the ruined fortress where even snow feared to fall. Lyra stood by Alden's side as he was exiled. She did not weep, only whispered, "Your time will come," not as a prince, but as something they cannot name. The people did not cheer nor protest. They only watched as the boy, with books and stars in his eyes, rode alone into the white unknown. And so began the true story of the forgotten prince.